This is an extract from the Leader podcast by the Evening Standard, hosted by me, David Marsland. To hear the whole thing, search for us on your podcast provider. The Evening Standard's been investigating how the lockdown is affecting London's economy, and what the newspapers found is alarming. We should be in the height of the tourist season, but last week the number of people in the West End was down 63% on this time last year. Hopes for some kind of a coronavirus recovery appear to be fading. Our editorial column says there's 4 weeks to save summer.
London is empty. Tills aren't ringing. Soho's bars are quiet. Canary Wharf is a ghost town, and of course there are few tourists. COVID feels like a disease targeted at destroying the thing that makes our city special, the energy that comes from close human connection. Worse, those in power haven't found the urgency needed to fix things. We're nowhere near the disaster that hit some American cities in the 80s, the hollowed-out ruin of Detroit with its rich suburbs and empty core. But if a lost summer is followed by a quiet winter, many shops, restaurants and theatres will be lost for good. The policy response needs to be a lot more ambitious. If it can't come from politicians, then it needs to come from all the rest of us. London's businesses, cultural centres and the creative energy of its people. Together we can save the city.
Well, Jonathan Prynn, the Evening Standard journalist who's been investigating this. And Jonathan, you've been looking at some facts and figures that really lay out how bad this has been for London.
Yeah, they do. And it's really not a pretty picture. I think most people had been hoping that by the time we got into August, we'd be starting to see quite a strong recovery from the ending of lockdown. But it's not really happening. I mean, there has been a slight bounce back, but it's nowhere near heading back towards levels that we used to consider normal back in 2019 and beyond. Across the West End, it looks like footfall last week was still down 63% on last year, which is obviously a massive shortfall in spending for all the restaurants, bars, shops, pubs, etc. across what's a major economic powerhouse for the country as a whole.
Yeah, we have been expecting some kind of an uplift for months now. Every month you and I go on the podcast, Jonathan, and we say, but it might get better next month or it might get better next quarter. Is that going to happen at all?
Well, I think the worrying thing is that there are no signs of it. We're running out of road so far as summer is concerned. September is only 4 weeks away, which is traditionally the end of sort of the peak season. I've also seen some forward booking figures which suggest that foreign tourists are not planning to come back to London anytime soon. Forward bookings for September are down 89% on September last year. And that suggests that even after the summer, the autumn is not going to be any brighter. So really, I think London's already starting to look to Christmas and beyond for some sort of salvation.
We're going to need one heck of a Christmas, though, aren't we, if we're going to try and stabilise this economy?
Well, we are, but the trouble is that even such a big part of the draw for London is the theatres and all the entertainment sectors, the opera and all the great famous venues that make London, the amazing international draw that it is. A lot of those places are already pretty much writing off Christmas and looking towards next year. You do also wonder, how many of the shops will actually survive through to Christmas trading. And also, we've got some polling data in today in the story which shows that 40% of people surveyed are still nervous about going into central London because of COVID. They still think they're at risk in the heart of a big city. to a much greater degree than if they, stayed in their sort of towns and villages and countryside outside London.
And it is pulling people back into the city, whether through tourism or just through going to the office, that will make the difference here, isn't it?
It absolutely is. I mean, there's sort of three categories, if you like. There's the office workers, who are the absolute bread and butter of London, central London's economy. They spend every day in restaurants, pubs, shops, etc., etc. There's the domestic tourists, who seem much keener on the fresh open air of Cornwall and Wales and the countryside at the moment. And then there's the foreign tourists who aren't coming because of quarantine and other factors, but largely quarantine. So all three of the mainstays of the central London economy are just missing in action at the moment.
And we are seeing the impacts of all of this. We've seen lots of job losses. Just today, Curry's PC World announced 800 job losses. There must be fears that more is coming.
There absolutely are, David, and I think the real worry is the sort of cliff edge ending of furlough in October. Although it's been pushed out into the autumn, way beyond what was originally planned, the Chancellor's made it fairly clear that there can't be any more furlough. The economy just can't afford it. So I think there's a real concern then what happens when individual businesses up and down the land, particularly in London, but across the country as well, look at their options for their future employment on a much lower level of economic activity, and then have to make some absolutely heartbreaking decisions about levels of staffing that they want to maintain for the long run.
We have, though, seen the launch of Eat Out to Help Out, which we covered on the podcast ahead of it happening. How did that go down? Is that going to make the kind of difference that industry needs?
It's been hugely welcomed and hugely helpful, and there's no question that bookings for the days that it's valid for, which, let's not forget, is only 13 days when all's said and done, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday in August. But it has been helpful. Bookings are very much up on those days. Restaurateurs love it. However, it is a short-term fix. It's only 13 days out of the whole year that it applies for, and there's already some evidence that it's dragging reservations from the weekend to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, when people can get their £10 off. So yes, two cheers. It's a good idea. It does seem to be working, but it's very much a sort of a short-term adrenaline hit, and when that's gone, the stark reality doesn't change.